But no, it's amazing to be part of this thing because I learned so much from these guys, and one of these guys who I learned so much from is Stephen Thomas. He's brilliant, so enjoy.
Thank you, Phil. It's very nice to see you all here. It's a very interesting room. We've got a band, a mirror ball, flowers, and there was a couple just looked in when Sarah was talking and went, wow, weirdest wedding reception I've ever been to. So yeah, right, okay. So I just want to start with a little story about Richard and I, because the topic just now of coffee was a really interesting thing that happened to us about 6-7 weeks ago. And the reason I'm telling you this is because I want you to know that even after 5 years of carnivore, I can still make mistakes and go, why didn't I do that? Because a lot of people start and they're really worried they're going to do the wrong thing. This isn't really carnivore. I want to eat avocados and all this sort of stuff. So anyway, up until age 59, if you'd have asked me the coffee question, I would have been like, there is no problem with coffee. I drink Swiss water decaf. I've been doing it for years. I like the moments, as people were talking about earlier, you know, going out in the early morning and sitting and having a coffee. Right, so that was age 59. By the way, I was told by a doctor with some very convincing images that by the time I was 50, I would be in a wheelchair. And here I am at 60 and that's not happening. And the reason I've done that little segue is because I'm still playing football. And I play five-a-side football on a Wednesday night, and I upped my training to do 2 nights of the week and then play on a Wednesday. And I started getting some knee pain. And I did what you shouldn't do when you're in the position I'm in. I just assumed, well, that's my age. This is what happens. You get knee pain when you get to this age. And Richard was talking about his coffee experiment and the fact that acrylamides, which is a compound from the roasting of coffee, can accumulate in joints. So unbeknownst to Richard, I stopped in my head that moment, right, I'm going to just see if the joint pain will go with just taking coffee out. So you've got to remember, I'm actually somebody that really likes coffee, understands why people drink it, and had been advocating for it in small amounts. And within 3 days, those joint pains had completely gone. Completely. And it was amazing. And when we talk about inflammation, I want to give you an actual, quantifiable difference. My inflammation was so bad, I genuinely thought my football boots were too small for me. And I couldn't work this out, and it coincided with the pains. The moment I stopped the coffee, the first game after stopping the coffee and the pains had gone, my football boots felt a little bit too big. So that's how inflamed I was. And I genuinely didn't realise that coffee could have that effect. I'm not saying I'm anti-coffee, I'm just saying that you need to be mindful. So even after 5 years, I now realise that I've got to keep on it. Now, the next bit is, the funny bit for me, is I'm definitely not perfect because I replace coffee with tea. Now tea's okay in the respect of acrylamides because it's not roasted and it's steeped and all this sort of stuff. But everyone who's followed me will know that my nemesis, one of them, is liquid dairy, milk. And I didn't realise that I was having tea a lot with milk. And I put on about 4 or 5 pounds very quickly. So this happens, you have to be mindful. You'll never get to the point in this journey, I think, where everything will be perfectly fine all the time. I think you just have to keep on it and keep listening to, different research and listen to your body, and don't accept aging as the excuse, because it invariably isn't aging. Now, the other thing, before the restrictions, I used to do a lot of one-to-one rehab, and you may have noticed I did a little bit of one-to-one rehab today. But not just me, there's other people that have come up. So in this last hour, 2 hours maybe, I fixed somebody's neck. A lady came up to Phil, almost in tears, because her arthritis. She went, "Look at my hands, look." And I'm thinking, right, I don't want to say the wrong thing, but those hands look perfect to me. I don't know what I'm supposed to say here. Just look at my hands, look at my hands. The point was, there was nothing wrong with her hands, and she couldn't move them 5 weeks ago. I have really bad arthritis, so I thought that was good. I've hopefully fixed someone's back. and showed someone how to get their knees to be less painful. And what I wanted to get across to those people that did that is you just have to understand the body. You don't have to believe someone in a white coat. And I'm sorry if this sounds like I'm being down on doctors. That's because I am. And, if you feel that there is a different way to sort something out, don't be scared to try it. Don't be scared to try it. The other thing that has recently happened is I mentioned a little while ago about my book. I'm going to plug my book. But there is a reason. Firstly, because I would like to sell some. But secondly, one of the things that I am known for is talking about how the bloods don't relate to the person when they're eating this way. All those ranges that we keep constantly hearing about, and you should be in this range, you should be in that range, are not really relevant when you're eating this way, because those ranges are not optimal. It's not about optimal health, it's about averages or normative ranges, and it's also about people who have been eating sort of 40% carbohydrates, 65% carbohydrates, certainly not relevant to this way of eating. So you could take some of the panels and say, well, what are the numbers that really are a bit misleading? So a really crucial one is kidney. So the filtration rate of your kidney can put you on the list for transplanting or dialysis, and it can be artificially low with this way of eating. There's a little E in front of the GFR, which means estimated. When you eat more protein, it throws the figures out because the waste products from meat will affect your blood urea nitrogen, it will affect your creatinine reading, and it is that the calculation is based on. So they might say, well, your eGFR is really low. Just to give you some sort of reference, if you don't know what I'm talking about, it needs to be about 60, and some people it can be as low as 15. But there is another test called the cystatin C test. In that book, there's a couple of case studies, and since then there's been some remarkable differences. But just taking that case study into consideration, when they did the cystatin C test, the doctor said, wow, I can't believe it, you're immediately off the list because your function is so different to what we was expecting. I have someone that was 4 years on the transplant list, and their GFR was allegedly 14, and the cystatin C showed it to be just around 30, which again takes them off stage 5 and takes them off the transplant list. I currently have a client, I was going to show you on my phone, but I don't know how to log it into this, and they came to me and they said, we've seen your videos, we've read your book, we want you to help us with a kidney disease protocol. And within 8 days, when I did the second session, he'd lost 9 pounds, and he was doing what's called peritoneal dialysis at home. That's basically when you hook yourself up to the machine at home, you sleep. It's quite a clever way of doing it, where fluids enter your body, and it uses the osmolality of your own tissue to filter. And he said, oh, the fluids are just so much better. And the funny story about that was, when I did the protocol, I gave him a list of 10 things that he could eat, even at this stage of his kidney failure, and 10 things I would really avoid. Now, when you're doing coaching in kidney or really serious health, very often it's the couple that's on the screen. So I'm talking to the guy and I'm going down this list of 10. Now, I deliberately didn't have a complete carnivore list. It was carnivore, and it was some non-carnivore stuff. So we started with all carnivore, and there's about 3 or 4 choices that weren't carnivore. And he's like, wow, this is really good, actually, because I'm a chef and I like to be a bit more experimental. I would have gone carnivore, but I might add those. And I'm like, absolutely, that's fine, can you do that? And then I went through the list of the 10 things you should not eat. And the wife started laughing at the end. And I said, have I said something funny? She said, yeah, that's everything he's been eating. And I said, right, well, that's why you're on the transplant list. So at least it showed that we were getting to the right things with that list. So that's it. So I've also got some notes, because there were some questions yesterday, and we wanted to look at vitamin D IUs, and I've got the figures for you. But we're going to get into the lecture, because it is a lecture, and it's a bit tongue-in-cheek that I'm calling it a lecture. So we're going to look at vitamin D, how it's synthesised, how sunlight can replace enzymatic activity, when the cofactors such as K2, which somebody mentioned earlier, MK4, MK7 and magnesium affect your health, and that wonderful franchise at the back there are going to teach me a bit more about magnesium. And I think that's another thing that we should all be aware of, that always be open and receptive to new information, even if it goes against what you believe. Because I don't think anyone in this room would be in this room if they were completely closed-minded. You have to be open-minded to even think about carnivore. But I think once you get to carnivore, I feel I'm a pretty successful coach. I've had over 1,000 success stories. I've been doing it 15 years when I was high carb. For the first 5 years of that. I did have some success, but not much. Getting heckled again already. And then when I went low carb, I got more success, and the more carbs I took out of people's diet, the more success stories I got. Anyway, what are the cofactors? How osteocalcin and MGP ensure that calcium arrives at the bone and is not deposited in soft tissue. How the bone acts as an endocrine organ, which is really underestimated. People think it's just like a stick of chalk, and can help with diabetes and insulin sensitivity. How inflamed tissue can make a different form of vitamin D that you may not have heard of. When you have been lied to about international units, sunscreen, and a certain medication, and what carboxylation is, and the role of undercarboxylated osteocalcin. Right, but before that, Phil mentioned I was going to talk about isotope testing, and the reason I want to do this is because many people say, I've gone carnivore, but all my friends think this is rubbish, or all my family are saying we should be eating fruit and veg. There's no proof that this is good for us. And this is the actual science. So before science was hijacked, there were always studies about where did these people live, where did they migrate to, what did they eat, why did they die out, and it was proper studies that were not funded by Big Pharma or Big Food. They actually wanted to know the answer to the questions, which is severely lacking in the last, I would possibly say, definitely in the last decade, maybe longer. But anyway, so stable isotope testing is a very powerful tool. The researchers use it because it can show you not just what they ate, but all their habits and where they migrated to, what happened when they were kids to when they were adults, those sort of things. And there are different parts of the body that can tell you different stories as well. But I want to just tell you what isotopes actually are. That's the first thing. They're different forms of the same element, and they have varying numbers of neutrons, resulting in slight difference in their atomic mass. So I've got a nice picture actually here. And carbon 12, carbon 13, carbon 14, I'll pick that deliberately because I think some people might have heard of carbon 12 dating and all this, but we'll talk about that. And what that shows you there is 6 protons, 6 neutrons. That's why it's called carbon 12. And carbon 13 has an extra neutron, so it's called carbon 13. I know the screen is very small. It's so small, these atoms are actual size. And carbon 14 there, 2 extra neutrons. Well, big deal, so what? Well, they're heavier and they're bigger, and it makes a big difference. And obviously it's not just one of them. So when these are in the atmosphere or they're in the food you eat, it will make a big, big difference. So why do we use stable isotopes? Well, there's a clue in the name, stable. They don't decay over time, which makes them very useful for studying the past. So carbon 12 and carbon 13 are used for plants, and nitrogen, 14 and 15 are used for animals. I'm going to link this back to blood, you see. A blood urea nitrogen test is looking at your protein metabolism because the breakdown of protein is nitrogen. So why is it called stable isotope testing? Well, there are things called unstable isotopes, and they decay over time, and that's why they're good for dating information. When I say dating, I don't mean who is the best person to go out with that evening. I mean, when did this thing happen? What was the decade? What was the century? What was the millennia from this particular study? And we call that radioactive, or it decays basically over time. So we can look at the level of decay and we can work out, yeah, that is 2,000 years old, 12,000 years old. But of course, stable isotopes don't do that. So once you eat something, it's absorbed into your tissue, and you die, and you get covered by sediment and buried, and then dug up, 3 million years later. That's all still going to be there. So it's been a long day, right? So the researchers analysed the ratios of the stable isotopes in the humans, particularly in the teeth and the long bones, to determine the types of foods that were consumed by those individuals. And we can just talk on why teeth is important, because teeth continuously grow. All right, so you get the diet of the person from when they were born to when they lose that tooth, actually, not when they die, obviously. But most people in the past did have actually their full set of 32 teeth. Long bones continually break down and reform. So we're going to talk about osteoclast, osteoblast later. So you get an approximation from long bones, and the collagen of the long bones in particular, of the last 10 years of that person's life. So straight away, we've got a really scientific method of saying, from this tooth that's in this skeleton, we can work out that they ate fish when they started, and actually by the third decade of their life, they didn't eat any fish and they were eating mainly land animals. There you go, straight away. Well, you've got some migratory information about someone from millions of years ago that you can get from this brilliant science, which is going to annoy you in a minute because it's been completely hijacked and lied about. But anyway, this is what we know. So it's really simple. By the way, this is going to be online. If you want slides, my card's at the back, just email me, you can have these, and really get it into your head. So it's very easy to tell people that this is the way, this is the proper human diet. Low carbon, low nitrogen just means the person was plant-based, with maybe some animal foods. We can't be categoric about that, but we can be very close to the percentages. High carbon, high nitrogen, seafood predominantly, in between it's land animals. So it's really easy to separate what we're doing. I don't want to get too technical because it is Sunday night and you've been sitting very patiently. So then you get into some flash terms like the trophic level. That just means where something falls in the food chain. So, you know, we're apex predators, and that's where we are, that's our trophic level. And each leap in the level shows a different ratio between the nitrogen 15 and 14. Now, nitrogen 15 accumulates in the tissues of the higher up animals, the ones that don't get predated on. So individuals who consume more animal protein, such as meat and fish, will have a higher nitrogen 15 level compared to those who relied on more plant-based diets. And I'm reading these out because I sat in the back and I couldn't see the screen really, and I spent yesterday rewriting some of these, so they were a bit bigger. And that's it. You compare the isotope ratios in teeth and bones, and then you get all these insights. For example, if an individual's teeth show a high proportion of marine resources compared to their bones, it suggests that they consume more seafood during their childhood than in the adult years. So, as I say, you look at that tooth, and you get some other signs as well. So you have this outer layer of enamel, and the underlying dentine layer contains not just collagen, but the mineral component as well. So we get some really good information from the mineral hydroxyapatite, which reflects fats, carbs, and proteins as well. So we can really be pretty categoric about what people were eating. We can also be very categoric about the difference between marine and terrestrial food. There's only one source of carbon in a terrestrial system, and that's carbon dioxide. So carbon 13 to carbon 12 ratio works. In aquatic systems, there's other sorts of carbon, the main one being dissolved carbonate. And I think Ben this morning said you can eat rocks. So yeah, the PHC dinner, if anyone went there, that was like eating rocks. Now, studies, particularly those focusing on early human foods or human diets during the Paleolithic period, suggest that animal foods may have made up a much larger proportion of the diet than previously thought. I took that exactly from ChatGPT, and we're going to talk about Google, ChatGPT, and if you do your own research. Because I didn't think that there was a large proportion of plants in diets of people in the past, because I've done actual research. And like I say, so the tooth enamel and all those sort of things, I don't want to get too much into repeating stuff. And also we can see seasonal variations, believe it or not. So, this is the chart, right? And then we're going to get into the kicker about how I was lied to. It's really this simple. So once they've analysed the bones, and they've looked at the stable isotope tests, and they've looked at the teeth, you can fit into this graph. So the bottom left-hand corner, if you've got low carbon, low nitrogen, it's plant-based. Simple as that. If it's high carbon, high nitrogen, it's marine, and in the middle it's animal. It's really so simple, okay? So, we know scientifically that humans ate mostly the fat and flesh of animals for over 2 million years at least. and I put in there, just don't ask Google or even ChatGPT. And the reason for that is because if you ask Google or ChatGPT, they will ignore the science. And you can interrogate ChatGPT. I haven't got all the screenshots, but basically I went through this process and asked them what was our ancestral diet, and they said it was about 80% plants, pretty much across the board, all continents, all periods of time. And I typed in, really? Because you can actually have a conversation with ChatGPT or like an imaginary one. So really? Because that's not my research. My research says the exact opposite. And I guarantee the next answer was exactly what they wrote. Oops, my apologies. I have got that the wrong way round. This is ChatGPT. And said, you were right, especially in the Paleolithic period, it was 80% animal, 20% plants. Now, the average person would not do that. I hope we're all not average people. So I'm just saying to you, if your friends say, no, we definitely ate a lot of plants, say to them, well, where do you get that information from? And can I have the studies? Because they won't be able to do that. They'll only be able to say, well, I looked it up on Google or wherever. So that's my little bit about stable isotope tested. So are you excited? Oh, no. Are you excited? Right, you've got some ammunition, all right? I'm going to get to the next bit. Now, I have got an honours degree in physiology and health sciences, but I think the best thing in life about this way of eating is noticing stuff. All right, so I was told by Sylvie that somebody had a bad back, and she said, he's over there, and I went, yeah, I think I could fix that. Just looking at posture, right? And that's now lacking in science. They've termed it evidence-based medicine, which sounds like the best thing in the world, doesn't it? Evidence-based. You think this has got to be the best thing. But that is actually ignoring clinical experience, which is the posh way of saying patients' outcomes. They are now relying on studies. And we all know that studies can have conflicts of interest. Again, I haven't got the slide with me, but I can just tell you in the abstract that the three conclusions from the studies, I then clicked on who funded the study. So there was a study about what is the best thing to eat for breakfast, and it concluded it was cereal, was funded by Quaker Oats. What is the best drink to replenish you when you're low in energy, was like a soda, Diet Coke, Coca-Cola. That was obviously funded by Coca-Cola, and so on and so on. So I think that's one of the things. We've got to say, well, that's not what I've noticed. So going back to the people in the room, that's what I noticed. You can fix people even though they've been told categorically they can't be fixed. I get that time and time again. So every single week at least one person will say something along the lines of, I've got type 2 diabetes, can you help me? I'd like to reverse it. I've been told it's chronic, progressive, and I can do nothing about it. And I say, well, what is the problem, do you think? Oh, I've got very high blood glucose. Well, what causes blood glucose to go high? Well, I've learned it's a lot of carbohydrates. What have the American Diabetes Association told you to do? Well, they've told me to eat a lot of carbohydrates. You know, it's, well, okay. So 15 years ago, when I did I've got a fair few qualifications. I'm a specialist practitioner in diabetes and obesity. And when I was first in a room like this, you know, being lectured to, I was told about dosing insulin in relation to carbohydrate intake. So say I was just sitting there, and I put my hand up and I went, why don't we just eat less carbs? 15 years ago, when I actually believed carbs were good. And they just laughed. They literally laughed. Well, you've got to have carbs. I said, well, you seem to be putting a lot of insulin into people based on the carbohydrates. Why don't we just cut it down? But anyway, that's what I noticed. But it took me 5 years of actually being in practice and maybe doing a thing like this and looking around the room and seeing, oh, actually, you've lost a lot of weight. What are you doing? And they say, oh, well, I'm not listening to you. We're actually doing this low carb thing. I go, oh, well, what about you? You look like you're doing really well. Well, we're not listening to you either. So I would find that about 15% of the people weren't listening at all. And wow, I'm so glad. Firstly, because yeah, it made me feel like I was very boring. But secondly, it was really interesting because it started to open my eyes that what I was doing was not working, but what people were doing of their own backs, what they'd noticed worked, was really good. So at age 50 I had an epiphany and thought, right, well, I've got to join the gang, I've got to go low carb. I haven't looked back since. But the reason I'm talking about have you ever noticed, which I did nick from Steve Coogan's character Duncan Thicket. Have you ever noticed, right? People used to notice stuff and then act on it and use their brains. So the Industrial Revolution, for instance, in 1760 to 1830, people got rickets. Okay. Now, believe it or not, I'm not going to say believe it or not too much longer. My mother had rickets. I was born very much late in her life, and if she was alive now, she died in my 20s of colon cancer, even though she followed the food guidelines, but that's for another day. She had rickets when she grew up. But they looked at the populations that had rickets, and they did a study. Why are people getting rickets? And what they realised was that people in the Industrial Revolution that were working in factories were getting rickets, and all the population that were out in the farms and the fields weren't. They didn't know about vitamin D, but they realised it was about being indoors or not being outdoors. And all these things here, 1650, 1822, 1890, 1990, you can have these slides if you want. These are all things that people noticed about being outdoors and what happens in the body. But the summary of this long list I just showed you is the discovery of vitamin D was a significant milestone in the understanding and prevention of rickets, and it paved the way for further research into the various functions and health implications of this essential nutrient. Hormone, I would say. You know, we know that the oldest hormone is vitamin D. We know that. All animals made it pretty much, millions of years ago. And this is where I'm just going to go off on a tangent about recommended daily allowances, because the recommended daily allowance isn't what's going to make you optimal, it's what's going to stop rickets. And that's a very small amount of vitamin D. So who else noticed the effects of sunlight? Well, that's Florence Nightingale, the lady with a lamp. And she wrote in her observations book in the Crimean War, which was 1853. And the reason I'm throwing dates in here is because this is how long we've known this. She noticed that all the soldiers that were in the well-ventilated or even outdoor beds, their wounds were healing much quicker. I had real cases of this. I had an American client who was looking after a father who had a terrible wound. He was told to sit indoors, cover it up, cover it in bandages and everything. And I said, just get him to sit outside for 30 minutes in the morning, get his foot, because he had an ulcerated foot. That's a sign of diabetes, by the way. And that will help, and it was incredible. It did help, and they were really surprised because they'd not been told to do that. In fact, they'd been told to avoid the sunlight. So there's a big name, Florence Nightingale, she noticed it. So let's talk about vitamin D. I know I had a question yesterday, and I will cover the question about cholecalciferol. I don't call it vitamin D, I call it vitamin free, because it's just light and heat. You can go out there now, Phil's out there talking, saying, Stephen's waffling on about this, but he's getting this brilliant vitamin D for nothing. So I mentioned that vitamin D is fat soluble because it is important to have fat with your vitamin D. A vitamin is technically something the body needs in small amounts, so we can't store ourselves. That's the technical thing. So when the skin is exposed to UVB radiation, as we say, from being outside the sunlight, 7-dehydrocholesterol absorbs the UVB photons. I'm going to unpick that in a second. But please note, we're going to talk about cholesterol biosynthesis, and remember that at the end, because we're going to talk about vitamin D, what happens in the body and how wonderful it is. So 7-dehydrocholesterol, and I'm saying it deliberately like that, what does that actually mean? It means a cholesterol molecule that has lost a hydrogen at the 7th position. I don't want people to get too bogged down in all the terminology, because when you unpick it, it is really simple to understand. For instance, when we talk about vitamin K, in German, coagulation begins with a K, and they realised that you would bleed to death without vitamin K. They didn't know it was vitamin K, but they knew it was a coagulant vitamin that was deficient actually. Anyway, we'll come to that later. Right, so to make the next step, you don't need any proteins, you don't need any enzymes, you need two things. You need light and heat, which Sarah so eloquently talks about all the time. This is a really practical example which we can talk about. What does light and heat actually do? Well, the UVB hits the 7-dehydrocholesterol and it attacks the B ring, which is the second ring you can see there. When I say attacks, it actually affects the B ring and it breaks that chain. A strange thing happens where the bonds, the chain breaks and the bond moves and the other bonds move around a little bit. So it changes the configuration, that's the posh term. And the structure changes a little bit. It's once this happens, it's undergone the thermosensitive reaction, then it's the isomerization process, which means it's changing in its structure. Still not an active form of D3. If you eat fatty food with your supplements, or by the way, or you eat any food and you keep the fat on, like Richard said about that butcher yesterday, it was sacrilege. I was like, you're cutting all the best bits off. We both feel exactly the same. Eating fatty foods really helps. It can increase absorption by about, I think it's something like 50 times. It is incredible. So, if you're at normal body temperature, and this might explain why saunas are really good, or laying out in the sun is really good, the isomerization of pre-vitamin D3 to D3 occurs over several hours. If you have higher temperatures, it's rapid, and it just, a sauna is going to make it really quickly convert, and obviously lower temperatures it's slower. So it's transported from the skin, so we started with the biggest organ in the body, and it's carried in the bloodstream for the next part, which is going to the liver, and it attaches to a vitamin D binding protein. If you want the slides, you can get all the more technical stuff. So the liver is an interesting organ, but so is the DBP, because it binds, but it also has a big effect on the bioavailability of all this. So, at this stage, it needs cofactors, so magnesium, oxygen, and NADPH. So vitamin D3 is then metabolized in the liver by an enzyme called 25-hydroxylase to form, I'm deliberately doing it again, 25-hydroxycholecalciferol. All right. So all that means is you're getting a hydroxy group added on the 25th carbon. It's also known as cholecalciferol, somebody mentioned that yesterday, or calcidiol, which is, the di is 2. So you've got 2 hydroxyl groups, so calcidiol, all right? So that's why you get these different names. So I can't work out why cholecalciferol would be toxic, someone mentioned that yesterday, because it's all just part of the system. So here's a little recap. Starts in your skin, the sunlight hits it, changes it to cholecalciferol, goes into the liver, becomes 25-hydroxycholecalciferol, and then it's going to go off to the kidneys, where it's further metabolized in the kidney by an enzyme called 1-alpha hydroxylase, and that gives a hydrogen to the first carbon, 1-alpha. Okay, so it's really simple. The convoluted proximal tubule cells of the kidney stimulates the production of that enzyme. That's important because the kidney does have a great role in this, but so do the tubules, actually, the proximal and the distal. So then you get calcidiol, like I say, so it's got 2 hydroxy groups. Now we're going to just talk about my labs before going any further, because I touched on it yesterday, and you can see it's a different format because I wanted to add this because I was talking about how labs can be very misleading, and because of the ethics in testing when you're doing clinical trials. If, as you can see in March, I don't think you could possibly see, I had low vitamin D3 levels of 25 OH, but I wasn't deficient. Now, if I was deficient and I was in a trial, I would not be able to be part of the trial for ethical reasons. So I am actually quite a good candidate for the experiment I'm going to do with the fermented cod liver oil and butter, which you can get from the back there, which is apparently very bioavailable. because you can see in March it was low, and it was also low in August when I had been out deliberately doing the jack cruise, getting out early morning sunlight, getting the kit off, grounding and everything. And one of the things I really like about Richard, when we talk on a Sunday, we do our live question and answer, is he has a really good thing to say about vitamin D. It's not about the levels, it's very consistent with how I feel, it's about how you feel. So I'm actually experimenting whether that's actually true for me as an N equals 1. So I'm going to try and get those levels up, like I say, with the fermented cod liver oil, and see how I feel. And don't forget, we're now getting out of summer and into sort of more autumn. But my vitamin D, or my O8 to 25, has never been particularly high. I've got numbers from May 2019, July 2019, March 2020, March 2024. It's always been reasonably low, and I've always eaten in that period of time, because that's when I was carnivore, fatty meat, and I've always been active because I play football every week and I walk and I like the sunlight. So everything that you've been told, is that particularly true? Is my body getting to a point where there's a step, a limiter to what will happen? And the answer is yes, there is a thing where your body says that's enough, and we'll come to that in a second. Because the rate limiting step is critical to know about, because your body is really smart. Because there is going to be, we're going to now talk about a different type of cholesterol, not yet, but we're getting there. All right, so we've got now 125 dihydroxycholecalciferol. So you've got di, which is 2, hydroxycholecalciferol, 125 on the carbon 1 and on the carbon 25. Okay, so this is what we've got. We've got this next step: cofactors, magnesium, oxygen, NAD, pH. And sometimes it's on the blood test as calcitriol. So it's calci, it's related to calcium, tri, 3, and OL is because of the hydroxy groups. That's why you see that on the bloods. 125 has an evil twin. I've called it the evil twin. It isn't an evil twin. 2425 dihydroxycholecalciferol. And this is the limiting step. Because what it does is it actually stops production of vitamin D. There's two ways this can happen. One is a really good physiological one, and one is not particularly good, and that comes from inflammatory foods. So if you've got an inflamed diet of high carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates, you will see this happen. And it's not good, it's not for the right reasons. And that could explain why you, and this is a real life example, I'm speaking to tomorrow as well, who lives in Arizona, so no shortage of sun, that is actually officially a desert, and he always has low vitamin D, and he's 30 years a vegan. So I do the bloods for him, and it's very interesting that 24-25 is quite high. So the body is not liking what's going on yet, it's not fully adapted. So the inflammatory response, when it's a good thing, will also make 24-25. Remember that inflammation isn't always bad. So like when I talked about my football boots, that was bad inflammation. But if I was kicked in the leg, and or my knee for instance, and that started to swell up, that would be part of the healing process, and that would be good inflammation. So cut out the inflammatory foods and only get the decent D3 going through your body for good reasons. So these rate limiting steps are very unusually, missed out of big presentations. And we had the question about active vitamin D as a better marker for bloods. The problem with that is they can be confounded by the parathyroid. If you have a parathyroid problem, because there is a lot of involvement of calcium and phosphate in this cycle, what actually happens is calcium and phosphate will be picked up by the parathyroid gland. Well, actually just the phosphate. So you get this sort of negative feedback loop. We'll talk about that in a second. I just want to move on, get to the graphics. Right. So let's talk about the thing we're trying to move with vitamin D3, which is calcium. People talk about calcium. Again, I want to keep mentioning Richard because we have such great lives on a Sunday. He's fountain of information. And calcium can be really tricky for some people. And certainly where they get their calcium from, or how they supplement with calcium, can be very tricky. But let's look at what actually happens so we understand what it's all about. So calcium from the diet. If you were a lion, you don't ever need to seem to want to supplement with calcium. I've watched a lot of lions on wildlife programs, and the lionesses always seem to be able to make milk. And they all seem to have pretty strong bones and be able to fight animals off and kill them. That doesn't tend to show me that they've got a calcium deficiency, and yet I don't see any calcium supplements, and I see a lot of red meat being eaten and a lot of lying in the sun. So when you eat what we're eating, there is enough calcium in there, unless your absorption of it is problematic or you have GI distress anyway. So let's have a look. Let's pretend that everything's fine, you've not been a vegan for 30 years, and you eat your food and your gut is in perfect health. What happens to that calcium? Well, you want absorption to the extracellular fluid, which can go backwards and forwards. And then you want it to go to the intracellular fluid, again that can go backwards and forwards. And you also want deposition in the bone, and you can also get resorption from the bone back to the extracellular fluid, and then you can have it go into the kidneys, where it can be reabsorbed, different word, because it's sort of going back around again, or you can have excretion. And it's a really simple chain when you look at it like that. But you can confuse it, and you can make it a little bit more technical, which we will do, because it makes sense of what we're talking about. If you can see this, hopefully you can, blood is shown, the interstitial fluid is shown, and then you've got enterocytes, and then you've got the lumen, which is the inside of the small intestine, and you have these enterocytes, and there's slight gaps in between. And calcium can go through what's called the paracellular pathway, doesn't need any help. Or it can go through a calcium channel, which is a protein basically, and that's called the transcellular pathway, and it's pumped out the other side against its gradient. All that means is if you've got a concentration of something here in a vessel, and a tube here and another vessel, and you've got lots of salt in this water, salty water, and this is like clear, this is a high concentration, this is a low concentration, and over time it will even out. That's all that means. But sometimes the body needs that to happen a lot quicker, so you've got what's called an ATPase, which is powered by ATP, and it actually pumps against the gradient. That's how important it is to get the calcium from there into the next stage. Yes, which I've just explained. All right, and there are other things. I'll put that in for people. Oh, there's other ways. There's calcium-sodium exchanges and all that. But anyway, right. So this bit I doubt you can see on here, but the bottom line is what happens in the nucleus of that cell. Well, you've got what's called a vitamin D receptor, and the reason I want to talk about vitamin D receptors is they are everywhere, which shows to me vitamin D is really important, really, really important. Because why else would it be there? You know, it's in your brain, it's in your lungs, it's in all your tissues really, it's in your bone, it's in your stomach, kidneys, liver, everywhere. Right, so vitamin D is vitally important. The immune system is a really huge place where there are a lot of receptors. So you've got a vitamin D receptor, and it has to meet up with the vitamin D, which at this point is calcitriol, and it meets up in the cytoplasm. That's important because it's a fat-soluble vitamin. So what we've got here is something that is lipophilic, which all that means is fat-loving, or hydrophobic, which is hating water. I mean, this is it. And then it forms a heterodimer, which is another posh way. Hetero just means different, dimer means two, so they link up together, vitamin D and the VDR. And then you've got a retinoid X receptor, exchange receptor, that means. Now, this is it in a nutshell, all the science and stuff. What does this actually mean? Well, it means it's in the nucleus now, and there is a thing called the vitamin D response element on the DNA. And as soon as we get to this bit, you'll go, oh, that makes total sense now. Why calcium is so important and why this is so important. Because that will join up on this vitamin D response element, and it will go through what's called translation transcription, and it will make proteins. So that's the role of this whole process. And what does it make? It makes calcium binding proteins. It makes calcium channels. It makes other things like alkaline phosphatase. which I throw in there because people worry about their liver, and sometimes the alkaline phosphatase is a bit high, or the ALT is a bit high. That's because there are other things going on that can make these proteins. So if you've got a binding protein of calcium and you've got more channels, it means, going back to the thing before, we've got more help for calcium to go from the stomach through the enterocyte out into the interstitial fluid and into the blood. And that's what we want. We want to get the calcium out of the stomach, and we want to take it somewhere else. Now, here is a simple list of the parts of the body that have vitamin D receptors. So there's 17 things there, even hair follicles and reproductive glands, all that sort of stuff, the heart. Right, just a little recap. So it's gone from the skin, sunlight's made it change to cholecalciferol, it's gone into the liver, it's gone through the kidneys. We picked up some phosphate and calcium ideas at the moment. But how does that calcium and phosphate get into the bone? Because that's where we want it. We don't want it in the arteries, we want it in the bone. How does that happen? Right. So do you remember we spoke about a 1-alpha hydroxylase? That's an enzyme. An enzyme is just a protein that breaks stuff down or puts it back together. That is directly stimulating the kidney. The kidneys is directly stimulated by low phosphate, so it starts to make that enzyme. So that's why the kidney is really important. Whereas low calcium is not dealt with in the kidney, it's the parathyroid. So low calcium indirectly stimulates 1-alpha hydroxylase via the parathyroid, which is going back to the blood. Why that is an issue. If you're looking at your vitamin D levels, you need to look at these levels as well, because it's a huge player in the transport of calcium and phosphate. So the parathyroid, it detects this low level of calcium and secretes PTH, and this increases active vitamin D. So how does it do that? Well, once it does that, parathyroid hormone increases the absorption in the GI tract and increases the reabsorption in the tubules of the kidney. So all of this is all joined up. Then it goes to the osteoclasts, which are the things that break down bones, and it releases calcium and phosphate from the bone. And you're like that guy. Well, that makes no sense. You're trying to make bone, but it's now signalling to release the phosphate and calcium. And that's because when it comes out, it's in a better ratio because the body is controlling it. It's got two things. It's got the parathyroid and the kidney looking at the levels, and it's trying to equalise them. So you might have too much phosphate, not enough calcium, or you might have too much calcium, not enough phosphate. And that's not good for the bones. The bones wants it in a particular way. So it spills it back out into the bloodstream and sends it back in the right ratio. So that's why if you're looking at your vitamin D status and you're worried about osteoporosis, and I have seen lots of reversal of osteoporosis, you need to look at other things like the parathyroid. Once they're together, because they sort of work in a synergistic sort of arrangement, they will go back into the bone and they will make it stronger. And this is where we're going to talk about, supplementation, because is it worth supplementing? So apparently it's estimated that 50% of the world's population are deficient in vitamin D, but there are some other factors, because only yesterday I was listening to something or somebody talking, and they were talking about vitamin D absorption. Actually, someone that I think is a very good influencer, and they were just talking about sunlight and how much you would need to supplement, and they didn't factor in skin colour, because white skin produces 5 times more vitamin D than dark skin. Also haplotype, where you live, everything. There's so many other variations on what you need to do to supplement. So we're going to go back to the question now: how does calcium and phosphate get to the bone? All right. So what happens now? This presentation, stops being about vitamin D3 and starts being about K2. So going back to K2. Like I say, germ of coagulant, that's how it was discovered. And I made a note of this actually because I thought it was quite interesting. Where is it? Anyway, I think it was 1943. A Nobel Prize was given for the discovery of the coagulant nutrient. It wasn't called vitamin K2, but that's what it was called, right? So hands over, and we're going to talk about osteocalcin and matrix glial protein, or MGP. We've got these recommended daily allowances for vitamin D and K2, but they're not really recommended daily allowances because there isn't really any guidance for K2. When we look at vitamin D, it's believed that infants should have 400 IUs, international units. Children and adults should have 600 IUs to supplement, and adults over 70, 800 IUs. But IUs are really there to confuse you, because 10,000 IUs sounds really, really a lot. And it's to scare you into not taking mega doses, which is language used to stop you taking vitamin D3 as a supplement, or to look at how much you're getting from sunbathing. If you look at 62 degree north, or Finland, which is how it's known by most normal people, and you do 30 minutes of sunbathing, you will get 10,000 to 20,000 IUs of vitamin D from the sunlight. Finland is not my destination for a sunny holiday, and 30 minutes of sunbathing is not excessive. So if your body can cope with 20,000 natural units of IU, vitamin D in international units, I think a supplement of 10,000 IUs is pretty easy to cope with. And that's what it looks like if you look at the percentage of the RDA on the left for people aged 1 to 70, and what you get from sunbathing in 30 minutes. Incredible. By the way, just saying there, PDF available with all the references for everything I'm saying, if you can't believe it. And this was from the study. It's the maximum amount that people got of IUs in Finland. So a tiny amount is what the recommended daily allowance is. The average amount is that's about 10,000 IUs. So yes, look at that dog and his owner having a sunbathe. I think that's pretty nice. I can't see how that's dangerous going out. But you will have this thing thrown at you about vitamin D toxicity. Is there such a thing? Well, yes, but it's one of the rarest medical conditions in the world. It could be another deficiency. It could be magnesium, or it could be a calcium regulation issue. There's other things it could be. And sun exposure, you might think, well, yeah, but it's just so dodgy to do any sunbathing. Well, I've got some links to studies and some brilliant quotes from dermatologists who are literally saying that most skin cancers happen in places where there's been no sun exposure. Not as in places in the world, places on the body. So there's nothing really that shows that sun exposure is dangerous. In fact, here's a quote from one of the studies. Non-smokers who avoided sun exposure had a life expectancy similar to smokers in the highest sun exposure, indicating that avoidance of sun exposure is a risk factor for death of a similar magnitude as smoking. So compared to the highest sun exposure group, life expectancy for avoiders of the sun exposure was reduced by 0.6 to 2.1 years. So it mitigated smoking, basically, and evened it up. I'm not saying to smoke, by the way. It's just quite an interesting figure. And then you've got this here, which you can get if you want the slides, which is written. It was in the British Journal of Dermatology, and that was all about the fact that members of this fraternity didn't think it was true that the distribution of melanomas did not correspond to areas of sun exposure. And they were saying that you'd expect them on the face, the arms, the legs, more than anywhere else, but that was not true. So there needs to be a re-evaluation of the role of UV radiation and recommendations for protection from it. There needs to be a new direction for research into this cause. So that is dermatologists. And again, we're looking at K2 now. There's no established RDA for K2, but they have copped out and they've said, here's an adequate intake. So this is a sort of rough guess of K2. But I want to talk about what K2 does. So osteocalcin is a protein that was discovered, I think, in 1970, might be 1995, but anyway. And it needs K2 to activate it. Osteocalcin moves calcium to the bone. And then you've got another thing called matrix GLA protein, which stops the bone going into the walls of the artery. So that's sort of lining the walls of the artery, pushing the calcium along, and osteocalcin is, with K2, holding its hand and making sure it gets to the bone. Now that's been the understanding for a long time, that is what happens. Activated osteocalcin binds to calcium and helps deposit into the bone matrix, promoting bone health. That's what I found on the Tinternet. And activated just means it's hooked up with K2. There is a process called carboxylation, which is a posh way of saying a hydroxyl group is added, and you can often see it denoted as COOH. But carboxylation is just adding a functional group, and again, I don't want to get sciencey, but basically molecules are added that makes it do stuff. Be a certain size, a certain weight, fold a certain way, and it can help move things along or through, or whatever you want it to do, or bind. That's another thing. So you need to know that phrase, because that's what happens. A carbon dioxide molecule is added to the other molecules, and you get this carboxylation of osteocalcin. So what actually happens is the inhibition of osteoclasts. So they're the things that break down bone. That is inhibited, so that stops that remodelling, reforming, and it helps with the regulation of the calcium balance. Rushing through this. And then the matrix GLA protein, that's dependent on K2 as well. Right, now, that is pretty much what everyone thought. The primary function of MGP is to inhibit calcification of soft tissues, particularly in blood vessels and cartilage. And it's a lovely theory, and it's really good, except there's a few holes in it. I haven't put the slide in there, but I'm doing this from memory now. So what happened was, there were what's called osteocalcin knockout mice. So these are mice, and I know it's a mouse study, where they can't make osteocalcin. And the researchers assumed, therefore, their bones would be not as sturdy, not as strong. And that wasn't actually what happened. What happened was their bones were pretty good. They had slightly different geometry, but there was no deleterious effects. So it seems to be that the MGP is actually the thing that is important here. And that remains undercarboxylated. So we're going to come back to that. So anyway, right, just before we get into that, I want to talk about MK4, MK7 or both. So is the food enough, or do I need to supplement? So when I was high carb and I decided to go low carb, I did a coronary artery calcium scan, and it was 639. What that means in plain English is the coronary arteries around my heart had calcium in it, and that is not good. 639 is quite a high score. At that point, I think Bill Clinton, this is how long ago it was, had his triple bypass, and his score was just over 1,000. But my consultant said, "Don't worry, I've just had someone in," and it was 3,000. There was an old bloke of about 85, and he's fine. And I did worry because I had a coronary artery calcium scan of 639. So for the first month, when I did my workouts, I wore a heart monitor, and I did all the typical things that I would not do in a million years now. And I took vitamin D3, and I took K2, MK7, should be the trans version, by the way. And I really worried. And then I read more about this, and I realised that the calcium was there to become like a natural stent. It was there was nothing I could do about it, I thought, and I decided to try just carnivore. That's it, I'm going to just do carnivore. I'm going to stop the supplements, see what happens. Now, I have not done a repeat CAC score yet, because how the logistics of this work is, if I do it for biohacking purposes, I jump the queue with the NHS, and I just can't do that morally. So until the queues for the waiting list, I should say, for the coronary artery calcium scan gets much smaller, I won't be doing it, but I will do a rescan. As soon as I've done that, I will publicise the results. My hope is that I would have reversed it, or at least stopped the progression, and at worst slowed down the progression. But I'm pretty confident what I'm doing. I'm moving along. Like I say, you can have all this. So You can find K2, MK7 in cheese, egg yolks, butter and liver. That's the takeaway there on foods. So this is what we've got. We've got the whole thing. Starts in the skin, sunlight, goes to the liver, goes to the kidney. The kidneys tubules get involved, so does the parathyroid, so does the bone. And we've got calcium and phosphate getting to the bone with the assistance of osteocalcin and K2 and MGP. Should you be concerned about magnesium, because we mentioned that about at the beginning as a cofactor? Well, here are the top symptoms of vitamin D deficiency: high blood pressure, lower mood, inflammation, weak immune system, sleep problems, skin issues, low back pain or muscle pain. So unless you're taking vitamin D or getting plenty of sunshine every 24 hours, you're likely to be vitamin D deficient. That's what people say. We also have to consider some other factors that hinder vitamin D levels, such as obesity, insulin resistance, which I think should be retermed cell resistance to the entry of glucose, but it's not so catchy. Diabetes, lack of sunshine, lack of vitamin D in the diet. So the glib advice is to take 10,000 IUs of vitamin D3 daily, and if you're worried about vitamin D toxicity, keep in mind that if you get out in the sun for 30 to 45 minutes, you're getting about 20,000 IUs of vitamin D. So 10,000 IUs is not too much for the body to handle. But you should also make sure you're getting plenty of magnesium, zinc, vitamin K2 and boron when you take vitamin D. And that's because these cofactors help all the things we just spoke about. So vitamin D toxicity, is this something that we need to worry about? Well, is it really vitamin D deficiency or is it magnesium deficiency? Because if you look at the symptoms of vitamin D deficiency that you might be feeling, like fatigue and tiredness, bone ache, weak bones, achiness, muscle aches, cramps, mood changes, depression, irritability, cardiovascular problems, irregular heartbeats, nausea and vomiting, increased risk of fractures, there are also symptoms of low magnesium. Some of the other things that are common is low vitamin K2, and they're the same. You've got fatigue and weakness, pain in the bones, weak bones, achiness, cardiovascular problems, irregular heartbeat, and increased risk of fractures. Over 60 for women, by the way, that is the biggest problem, is fractures. And you can always tell how good your bones are, by the way, if you're a female and you put your hand around your wrist. If your finger and thumb overlaps, then you tend to have thin bones, by the way. That's just the thing there. So when they say the toxicity of vitamin D gives you all these symptoms, so does the deficiency, that's the point, of vitamin D, or the deficiency of magnesium. So it's not that simple. And like I say, it's actually a rare medical condition. So I'm going to move on, because I know you can't really read it from here. Let's just move on. I'm just getting through these bits. If you want all this, that's fine. I'm just talking about food. So how do you test your vitamin K2 status? And this is what we were talking about yesterday as well, because this test isn't right either. And this is 1995, I think they started testing it. Could even be 2007. There are no useful tests for vitamin K status, but what they were using was undercarboxylated osteocalcin as a marker. And it's not in the book, by the way, it'll be in the second book, because this is really important. It doesn't tell you about your vitamin K status at all. There is a link, and I can see why they thought this, but undercarboxylated osteocalcin has a huge implication in health areas in other regions of the body. Just to cover up myself, contraindications, if you've got any sort of anticoagulant medications, then you need to talk to your physician about this before you take any vitamin K. So, let's go through all this. Right, here we go. The reason that I want to talk about the undercarboxylated osteocalcin is because it plays a big role in insulin sensitivity and glucose management. It can make a big difference to people that have got diabetes. When you exercise, you release a thing called interleukin 6 or IL-6, and that increases the release of undercarboxylated osteocalcium from the bone. So it has a big role to play, and it basically stimulates the skeletal muscle, and it also stimulates the adipose tissue. I think that's not on there, but anyway, to release free fatty acids, but also other factors which have a huge impact on your insulin sensitivity. In fact, with insulin, when you start looking into this, and I'm not going to do it today because it is a bit too convoluted, but if we did this whole thing, you would see that insulin can't cause insulin resistance, because whenever you do something that increases the release of insulin, you also get something that increases the sensitivity. So it's more about what's happening at cellular level, and probably just simply eating too many nutrients, or the cell's not wanting to accept it. So, right. Well, I wanted to get to this bit because I know it's been a long day. Right, so this was quite a convoluted story of the journey of vitamin D, and how sunlight helps, and how vitamin K helps, and all the things it can help do, which is get bone strong and healthy. It can also stop calcium getting into your arteries and causing you cardiovascular disease. So it's amazing, it's absolutely amazing. And I said to remember this cholesterol biosynthesis, to remember it. Well, there is a step before we get to the 7 cholesterol, the 7-hydrocholesterol. There's a step before this, and it's to do with an enzyme called HMG-CoA reductase, and that changes cholesterol to the 7, and it's a crucial enzyme. And the reason I want to mention this is because none of that happens, none of what I've said in the last hour happens if you don't have enough HMG-CoA reductase. So what stops that enzyme? Without this enzyme, we couldn't do all those things. Statins. Now, this is not an anti-statin rant, but it's just, if you've got somebody in the family who's having weak bones, osteoporosis, fatigue, and all those things that I put in that list, and they're on a statin, that's a conversation you need to have with your doctor, because you're stopping that process, an essential process. As Richard often says, cholesterol is essential for life, but it's essential for health. Movement, exercise, thinking, breathing, it really is essential for everything. So if you're inhibiting the activity of HMG-CoA reductase, then you are stopping all of what we've just seen. Here is a simple list of the most common side effects associated with the statin drugs. You'll see the numbers 1, 2, 3 and 7. It's all referenced, and you will probably notice it is the same as many of the other things we talked about earlier. There's the citations for that, and there it is with all the other things. It is responsible for all the things on that list. All of those are side effects: fatigue and tiredness, muscle weakness, cognitive impairment, which I've got because it's late on a Sunday, but I'm not taking a statin, nausea and vomiting, hair loss, tingling, headaches, migraines, insomnia, difficulty sleeping, bone pain, weak bones, achiness, dizziness, elevated liver enzymes. Very important, because I do so many bloods and people are worried about elevated liver enzymes. Guess what my first question is? Do you take statins? I thought someone would shout it. And the second one is, do you exercise a lot? Because that can be the other reason. So there's a yin and yang there. Hepatitis, pancreatitis. So that's my presentation. I hope that made sense. It was supposed to be ancestral. I did make some notes, but I think I've gone on too long. Anyway, so I will leave it there, I think. That's it. Bill?
This thing's very temperamental. Yes, brilliant. Thank you so much. And listen, if there are any questions, if anybody's got any, because that's the talks are done, and so going to get Richard up as well if anybody wants to ask anything, because this is your last chance with these guys, and it's rare to get them both together when, apart from on a screen, you know. So be careful though with questions, because Richard will answer on steroids.
Am I using that one?
Right. Anybody got any last questions? Yes. Sue.
I'm not sure whether you covered this or not, because I did come in a little bit late, so apologies. Magnesium supplements, what's the recommended sort of dosage for that?
So I think Sarah covered a little bit of this earlier on. There's no ideal recommendation. It tends to be around 400 to 600 milligrams, but it does depend on the bioavailability of the magnesium. So typically you want to avoid a magnesium oxide. The bioavailability, which is how much of the magnesium is actually absorbed, is incredibly low. It's around 4%. Something with a higher level of bioavailability is going to be a citrate, anything other than a magnesium oxide. But magnesium oxide, magnesium in general, is essential for over 300 enzymatic processes within the body. It's a compound that we can't really overconsume. Magnesium and calcium work almost against each other to a degree within the cell. We need these in the cell at a 1-to-1 ratio, but what we tend to do is over-supplement with calcium. This is something Stephen and I cover many times on a Sunday Live. Calcium is in everything. If we look at the ratio of the electrolytes, sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, as nature intended, if we look at a piece of beef or a piece of lamb or organ meats, it predominates potassium, which is another point that Sarah made. The potassium is incredibly important. Potassium is around 4 times higher than sodium, and then it drops from sodium right down to magnesium, and just under magnesium generally is calcium. Over-supplementation of calcium can cause many problems within the body. It's essential, and make no bones about that, pun intended. See what I did there? Stand-up comedian. We need calcium. It's one of 6 elements that is in 99% of every cell within the body. So we do need it, but we need a little bit of amount. We need the right amount. If we overconsume calcium, calcium will deplete magnesium. So when we look at people who suffer with cramps, for example, let's look at something simple. We're told to supplement with a magnesium supplement. Quite often, it's not because we are magnesium deficient, although many of us are. It's usually to do with the overconsumption of calcium. So the calcium is depleting the magnesium. If we look, again, as nature intended, eggs and milk are the only 2 things outside of the meats that do not fit that ratio that I just mentioned, because these are compounds that we need to give birth or to feed a newborn. We're not designed to consume milk past infancy, and an egg itself, which is high in calcium, is there to give birth. Beyond this, we're not designed to drink milk past the age of infancy. So the calcium consumption is incredibly important, just as important as the magnesium consumption. We want to keep calcium as low as we can, eat as nature intended, but the magnesium, as far as supplementation goes, 400 to 600. But if you eat as nature intended, then we should obtain most of the magnesium that we need without supplementation. Does that help?
Thank you. Yes, it was cramps. In fact, last night I woke up in the middle of the morning and cramp. Yeah. Literally leapt out of bed. I was like,
yeah. So again, do you do too much training, running?
Don't do running, no. Predominantly, CrossFit training.
CrossFit, so super high intensity. So we need the calcium. We need the calcium for that process of creating energy, so on and so forth. But the overexpression or the overusage of calcium is going to deplete that magnesium. So try to avoid the foods that are going to be higher in calcium. Cheese is a big thing within the carnivore community, which I eat. I love lots of cheese.
We covered that one before, didn't we?
Yeah, lots of cheese. I love cheese, but I'm mindful not to overconsume the calcium from cheese. Milk, again. Eggs, I'm a lover of eggs, but I tend to move in cycles. Just watch that ratio.
Thank you.
No worries.
Hi. When I was talking yesterday about the cholecalciferol, it was specifically cholecalciferol coming from sheep's lanolin, I mean, is there is there a difference in supplement, how they make the supplements? Is there a different D3?
I'm not sure. Do you know?
I didn't quite hear the question. Sorry.
Yesterday I was asking about the toxicity of cholecalciferol, and I think I remember I was talking about the cholecalciferol that was made from sheep's lanolin.
Did you get that?
But I've not heard that. I mean, I've researched, and I've never seen a report of toxicity of cholecalciferol.
Oh, right, okay. The other thing is magnesium chloride in magnesium oil. Is that a good way to supplement with magnesium?
Yes, and again, the stall at the back offer topical substances to go on the bottom of your feet or your skin. So there's many means to get magnesium also, but it's the electrolytes that they sell, also very high in citrate, which is incredibly good for combating things like oxalate detoxing, or oxalate dumping, and potassium citrate also. Okay. But yeah, fantastic.
Okay, thank you.
I'm looking at the toxic cholecalciferol.
Yeah, interesting one. One yeah, I think
I've not seen it, but anyway.
Maybe from a different manufacturer and how they made it.
So when we look at that aside, if we look at supplementation, quite often what we get in a supplement is not the same. It's completely different to something we would obtain from nature. Sarah mentioned earlier about iron. Iron in cornflakes, for example, that's iron that's mined from the ground. It's not iron that we've obtained through eating and consuming an organic life form. If we look at salt, for example, we're told to avoid salt. Salt is essential. We can't live without salt. Much of the high blood pressure, and somebody covered this in a talk earlier, but it's elevated insulin that leads to, and I'm going off on a tangent, apologies, but it will be worth it. Elevated insulin is what leads to high blood pressure because through 4 points in the nephrons in the kidneys, it pulls the sodium back in, and along with that is the water. Where were we going with this? What was the original question? Where were we going with this? It was to do with the sodium being top. So basically, we're told to fear sodium, but there's a study that covers over 100,000 participants in 17 countries and actually shows an inverse association. It looks at the risk of cardiovascular disease, or all-cause mortality, in fact. And what it shows on the scale is the less sodium we consume, the higher our risk of death. So we're told to consume around 1,500 milligrams. Yet what we found with this study is below 1,500, so a massive increase in all-cause mortality, with a sweet spot being between 4,000 to 6,000 milligrams, where even as high as 10,000 milligrams were showing a benefit and a safer zone than 1,500 milligrams. Now the reason I say that, and I have gone off on a tangent, apologies, but sodium is essential, it's super important. But we can get sodium within this community, as you know, from things like pink Himalayan, or we can get it from things like Celtic sea salt. Pink Himalayan comes from the rocks. Pink Himalayan hasn't passed through a life force, and that's the difference with Celtic sea salt. So they're both salts, they're both incredibly good for you, but Celtic sea salt is far more bioavailable because it's passed through a living organism, or it used to be a living organism. And that's the difference between something that is mined and something that was once alive. So generally, when we look at supplementation, vitamin A, somebody mentioned it earlier on, vitamin A toxicity. Vitamin A toxicity is usually caused by supplementation. It's very different from real vitamin A, and so on and so forth. So when we look conjugated linoleic acid, if we look at CLA, conjugated linoleic acid, it's linoleic acid, and we know linoleic acid is high in that oxidized omega-6, which is detrimental for us. But when this is found in a living organism, it's actually very beneficial. So these things are two very different things, you know. So what I would say is, from a supplement form, I'd always question any study, because most of the studies that show certain vitamins or minerals cause a problem, they tend to be the mined version, or the version that isn't natural. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing about salt is, like, table salt has got anti-caking agents. I think it's something ferrocyanide. Is that not what actually, when they're saying lower your salt, it should really be lower the table salt, because that's what's actually causing the issues with the heart?
Yeah, spot on. Table salt is toxic.
Yeah.
Table salt is toxic. I would use table salt over no salt if I had to get some salt, but I would always preference an organic version, as in the Celtic sea salt. And the guys at the back sell the Celtic sea salt, which is certified microplastic free as well, which is really important. But yeah, spot on. Anything to add to that, Steve?
Well, yeah, I've searched that up again, and the only thing it's come up with is it's used in a substance to kill rodents, and that is at such a high concentration that it kills rodents. But I can't find anything about it in human nutrition. And I've used Google Scholar and PubMed, and I've really searched it.
Yeah, no, it was just a report that I read a few years ago.
Could you use the mic? Sorry. Or is it gone?
Phil's done a run out.
For those that don't know, I'm deaf and I lip read, but I'm not a great lip reader, and I wear hearing aids. It's just difficult.
It was a study that I'd read a few years ago, and they were talking, as you know, they were talking about the different types of D3 and how we might be measuring the wrong one, and also if our bodies aren't producing it, especially for people who live in the northern hemisphere, is there really a requirement for it? So it was just an interesting view of D3.
Yeah, I mean, if you could send me that, I'd love to. I would look at it because I'm interested in this.
Yeah, I'll look at it. I'll look for it again because
Okay.
I tried to look for it before.
My card's at the table, and you can just email.
Okay,
it
I'll
and
take
go
your
through
card.
it.
Thank you.
Richard, you mentioned during your talk that you had an addiction to nuts, and you said you didn't have time to go into that, but I'd like to know about that because I've got somebody sat next to me that's addicted to nuts, and always snacking on them, even though we're doing great on the diets, and we're going to go carnivore after this because you've all kind of convinced us that's the way to go. But how do I stop somebody from snacking on nuts?
Perfect. If you ever want convincing the carnivore works, Stephen's 60. 60. I don't think he looks 60 personally. You are 60.
I feel it tonight.
Yeah. So yeah, proof's in the pudding. Nuts. Look, I was addicted to nuts in my early journeys. So we're told they're high in omega-3s, for example, but they contain ALA. The human body needs EPA and DHA. So one, we can't convert efficiently the ALA into EPA and DHA. So that's one strike against where people will say that they're a good source of omega-3s. You can get low-carb nuts in the form of things like almonds and macadamia and so on and so forth. But these compounds contain phytic acids as well as lectins. And the lectins are the reason that most people will stall. So you've begun, you guys were telling me earlier that you've begun your ketogenic journey, some fantastic weight loss, which began by cutting alcohol, which is incredible. And a gentleman there was telling me how easy it was that once you realised he didn't want it, correct me if I'm wrong, but you stopped the alcohol, and 3 months in, I think you were 2 and 3 stone down between you, which is incredible. So give a round of applause, that's absolutely incredible. So what we find is the weight loss will start to come down, but nothing moves in a straight line. It doesn't do this. The weight is going to do this over time. And this is the reason that many people throw in the towel because something isn't working. But lectins are usually the cause. So the lectins will bind to insulin receptors and they will elicit an insulin response. And this can lead to a 5 times higher fat storage than consuming carbohydrates. So you could be consuming X amount of nuts, but you signal in your body that's storing 5 times more fat. And they're highly addictive. They block leptin. Lectins block leptin. And from the talk earlier, leptin is the hormone that tells us that we're full. And I may be wrong with this, but just a stab in the dark. When you go to consume some of your nuts and you take a handful away, are you going back 2 minutes later to grab some more and again and sometimes again? Or do you just eat the whole pack?
I would do if she let me.
So they're highly addictive. They're highly addictive. Beyond this, a lot of nuts and seeds contain items or compounds called cyanogenic glycosides. Almonds are high in cyanogenic glycosides. Flax seeds are very high in cyanogenic glycosides. Cyanogenic glycosides break down into cyanide. Cyanide is one of the most toxic compounds to the human body. If I were to hold, and this is something we do in the lives, isn't it? I have a pack of flaxseed. That flaxseed is about 100 grams. 3/4 of that pack, if you were to blend that and consume it in one go, that would kill you in an instant. So when we look at these toxins, it's what I quite often get back is, well, it's all in moderation. A little bit's not going to harm me, but borrow Steve's water. If I were to hand you this and it was full of rat poison, and I were to offer you this, but this is going to kill you, and I'm going to give you this rat poison, it's going to kill you in an instant, would you drink it? No. So if I'm going to remove all of this rat poison down to this much. Now this much isn't going to kill you. It's not enough to kill you. I'm going to fill the rest up with vitamins and minerals and stevia, and this is the nicest drink that you've ever tasted. This is going to be the best thing that you've ever drunk, but it won't kill you because I've only put this much rat poison in. Will you drink it? No. Yet, this is what we do on a daily basis when we consume these compounds like flax seeds and other compounds that contain these cyanogenic glycosides. Pips from apples, for example, contain amygdalin. And many people will grind and blend up these apples. 8 apples, the seeds from 8 apples is enough to kill an adult human being. And as yesterday we discussed in regards to things like the spinach, 15,000 milligrams, apologies, of oxalate is enough to kill you dead. So when we look at the average pack of spinach, there's around 750 per 100, which means there's around 1,500 milligrams per pack. So 10 of those packs is enough to kill an adult human being in an instant, with recorded deaths being as low as 3,000 milligrams. So my point to this is, the nuts and seeds, do they sound so appetizing now? No. If you are going to consume nuts, macadamia or pili are the better nuts to consume because they are at least 0 lectin, they're lectin free. So out of all the nuts, the macadamia and the pili are going to be more beneficial or cause less harm. But ideally, we want to try to come away from all of the nuts and seeds and things. Does that help?
Yes, definitely.
No more nuts, I'm guessing.
No more nuts.
Fantastic. Any other questions, guys?
Are we all done? Cool. Well, thank you so much again, guys. Thank you, Stephen. Brilliant. And that's actually it. So apart from hanging out, here's Lydia, come up here. I could have done absolutely none of this without Lydia. She's done all the actual grown-up stuff, you know. I've just sort of, I've just played around with musical equipment and getting these wonderful people up to speak. So thank you. It's been amazing. So thanks to Lydia. This is why it's happened, and I hope you enjoyed it. But I think there's been some amazing moments and some great vibes here. And you know, if you want to stay on, listen to some great musicians, or hang out around the fire pit and drop stakes through and try and get them out of the ash and all that sort of thing, where you go. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you very much.